I was only 12 years old when my own father, a man respected by our entire town, started touching me in ways no daughter should ever be touched in this life. But the worst wasn't that. It was when I was 16 and saw him approaching the small bedroom where my little 7-year-old sister slept. That's when I decided he needed to die to end that hell on earth. It wasn't a decision made in the heat of the moment. It was something cold that ran down my spine like ice water, giving me a certainty that never left me. It was either his life or my baby sister's innocence. And I had already seen and lived through enough misery to know the world wouldn't miss that wretched man I called Father, Walter Johnson. My name is Eleanor May Johnson, but folks round these parts call me Miss Ellie. I'm 83 years old. Some years I'd rather forget, but many more I'm grateful for. I was born in Millbrook, Alabama, back when they barely had proper electricity. Before I go any further with my story, would you be kind enough to hit that subscribe button for me? This old lady would surely appreciate it. I don't tell my story often. Lord knows it took me over 60 years to find the courage. And I'd hate for you to miss the other true stories from women like me who've walked through fire and came out stronger. Go on now. Press that button. I'll wait right here in my rocking chair. Looking in the mirror today, I hardly recognize that little girl with messy braids I once was. What I see is an old woman with white hair almost always pulled back in a bun, wrinkled skin that's seen more sun than it should have, and hands covered in blue veins that tell stories of hard work. I have light blue eyes, rare in these parts, inherited from my mama. I've seen so much wickedness that I learned to recognize it before it even opens its mouth. Today, I live in this modest little house here in Savannah, Georgia, that I earned through honest work, thank the Lord. I have my porch with rocking chairs where I spend my afternoons, my garden full of herbs and flowers. Why don't you tell me your name and where you're watching from right now, sweetheart? Leave it right there in the comments. I just love imagining my voice reaching places these old legs can't visit anymore. Who knows? Maybe someone from Millbrook, where I was born and raised, is watching. Or even someone here from Savannah. We could arrange to have some sweet tea and cornbread that I still make myself. I'm one of those grandmas who hasn't lost her touch in the kitchen, you know. As they say, an old pot makes the best food. I always dress in simple clothes, but they're always neatly pressed. I don't leave the house without making myself presentable. I may be old, but I ain't dead yet, honey. Life was ugly to me, but I won't be ugly back to it. Life taught me hard lessons, but it also gave me unexpected gifts. It's been 35 years since I founded the New Dawn Center. It started small in a back room of my house when I took in the first girl who appeared at my door in the middle of the night, running from her stepfather. I remembered myself, except this girl had somewhere to run to, and I didn't. Today, the center has sheltered more than 500 girls who've been victims of abuse. 500 souls who, God willing, won't need to go through what I went through or do what I did. I've never spoken about this in public. This is a story I've kept for more than 60 years, a story so heavy that not even my late husband knew it completely. With all these details, he sensed there were things I wasn't telling him. He saw it in my eyes when I'd wake up screaming in the middle of the night from nightmares. But he was a good man who respected my silence. He might have suspected, but he never pushed. He was the only man who showed me that not all men are monsters. Oh, how I miss my old man. It's not easy to unstop the bottle of the past after keeping my mouth shut for so long. But maybe it's time to tell it, to lift this weight off. I'm 83 years old now. What more can they do to me? Life taught me that silence protects monsters, not victims. And maybe my story will help some girl out there not go through what I went through, or at least know she's not alone, that other women have walked similar roads and survived to tell the tale. Life in Millbrook back in my childhood was very different from the big cities today. It was a small town where everybody knew everybody, the kind of place where the most terrible secrets stay hidden behind polite smiles and pats on the back after Sunday service. My father, Walter Johnson, owned Johnson's General Store, an establishment that sold a little bit of everything: food, fabric, kerosene, tools. He was the kind of man others respected, called Mr. Walter, asked for his opinion, trusted. In front of others, he was all smiles and kindness. At home, when the door closed, he became someone else entirely. We lived in a house behind the store. It wasn't anything special, but it was better than many houses at that time. It had 2 bedrooms, one for my parents, another where I slept with my sisters Betty and Sarah. Betty was 2 years younger than me, a quiet girl with constantly frightened eyes. Sarah, the baby, was 7 years younger than me, a cheerful, talkative child who was the only one who could draw genuine smiles from my father. My mother, Mary, was a fragile woman in every sense. She was always sick with what they called a nervous condition back then, but which I now know was depression. She spent days in bed, taking medicines that left her in a fog, with a vacant stare. On good days, she was affectionate and made chess pie that filled the whole block with its smell. On bad days, she barely recognized her own daughters. She was pretty, with blue eyes like mine, but life slowly dimmed her, like a candle melting without anyone noticing. The general store was the center of our lives. I spent more time there than at school. My father said too much schooling spoils a girl, so I only went enough to learn the basics. What he really wanted was for me to learn how to handle the business, serve customers, and do calculations. And it was there, in the store, that everything started to go wrong. I remember like it was yesterday. I was 12 years old. It was late afternoon. The store had already closed to the public, but we still had work to do. My father asked me to help close the cash register, something I did almost every day. My mother was bedridden, as happened frequently. Betty had gone to fetch water from the well. Sarah was still a baby. It was just the 2 of us in the silent store, with that smell of coffee, kerosene, and molasses that even today gives me a tightness in my chest when I catch a whiff of it. "Come here, daughter. Sit on Daddy's lap," he said, patting his leg. I thought it strange. I wasn't such a little girl anymore to sit on laps. But I obeyed. I always obeyed. From an early age, I learned that disobeying father meant a beating for sure. But when I sat down, I felt something different. His hand didn't stay still. It started at my legs, moving upward without stopping, touching me in ways that made me feel dirty, ashamed. I froze inside, not fully understanding what was happening, only knowing it was wrong. When I tried to get up, he held me firmly. "Now listen here, girl. If you tell anyone about our little secret, your mama's gonna have such a bad nervous spell she'll die, and it'll be all your fault," he whispered in my ear, with a smell of bourbon I hadn't noticed before. That day, he didn't go all the way. He let me go trembling and confused, but it was just the beginning. In the weeks that followed, he'd always find a way to get me alone. At first it was touches, then it got worse. I'd cry in secret, not understanding what I'd done wrong to deserve this. I tried to tell my mama once, on one of those rare days when she was lucid. "You're making up stories, girl," she said. "Your father is a good man. We're lucky to have him. Many a woman around here can't say the same." And that was all she said before taking another one of those pills that left her staring at nothing. With time, I learned to hide better, to recognize the signs of when he was in that mood. The way he looked, how he'd stroke his mustache, the sweeter tone in his voice. My sisters and I developed a silent warning system because it wasn't long before Betty became a target too. She was only 7 the first time. I noticed by the way she came back from the store that day, silent, with distant eyes. I recognized it because that's how I would get. I hugged her without saying anything, and she began to cry softly. We didn't need words to understand what had happened. From then on, we made a silent pact. We always tried to stay together, to warn each other when father was nearby, to never leave him alone with Sarah. The little one was the joy of the house, the only pure thing we had. We would do anything to protect her. Years passed, and the situation only got worse. My mother sank deeper and deeper into her medicines, practically no longer participating in family life. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at us with a strange expression, as if she knew what was happening, but couldn't do anything about it. Other times, she'd explicitly push us away when we tried to tell her, "Don't want to hear no lies from you, girl. Your father is a respected man in town. We should be grateful he takes care of us." It was as if she preferred to hide behind her medicines rather than face the truth. And maybe that's exactly what it was. She had no strength, nowhere to go with 3 little girls. She depended entirely on him. It was easier to pretend not to see. When I was 14, I hatched a plan to run away with Betty. I saved up pennies and nickels that I managed to hide over months. I made small bundles with essential clothes, and we planned to go to Montgomery, where my mother's sister lived. We had never been there, but we knew the address because letters sometimes arrived from her. The plan was to leave at dawn, hitchhike on the road with some trucker, something dangerous, I know now, but at the time it seemed like our only chance. But on the eve of our escape, my father discovered the bundles hidden under the bed. I never knew how he suspected. Maybe he noticed the missing money. Maybe someone heard Betty and me whispering. The beating we took that night was the worst yet. He started with the belt, then the broom handle. He screamed that we were ungrateful, that he gave us food, a roof, clothes, and this was how we thanked him. He beat us until he was tired, leaving us covered in purple and red marks. It was on that occasion that I got this scar on my chin. When I tried to protect Betty from a belt strike, he gave me a slap with his hand where he wore a heavy ring. The cut was so deep that even today the mark is here to tell the story. My mother, who usually hid during these beatings, this time had such a severe nervous breakdown that she had to be hospitalized for 2 weeks. When she returned, she was more absent than ever. After the failed escape attempt, Father's watchful eye increased. We couldn't go anywhere alone. School, church, the well, there was always someone watching. We were practically prisoners. Father made it clear that if we tried anything similar again, the consequences would be worse. Next time, I won't waste time beating you. I'll just end you both, you ungrateful brats. And the worst part was that in town, in front of others, he remained the respectable man, the honest shopkeeper, the good family man. No one suspected what happened when the doors closed. Now, before I go on with this story, I'd like to ask if you'd be kind enough to press that little like button down there. What I'm about to reveal next is so heavy, so difficult to hear, that I bet many people won't even have the stomach to keep watching. Only the truly brave-hearted will manage to listen to the end and still leave a thumbs up. Are you brave enough? I'll be keeping an eye out to see who can really handle this story. It was around this time that I started learning bookkeeping from Mr. Tibbs, an elderly gentleman who did the books for the store. It was my father's idea. He noticed I had a knack for numbers and thought he could save money if I took over this function. Mr. Tibbs was a gentle man of few words who didn't ask questions when he saw marks on my arms or the dark circles under my eyes from sleepless nights. He taught me patiently, showed me how to record income and expenses, how to calculate taxes, how to keep everything organized. And without meaning to, he gave me the tool I would one day use to end my tormentor. The more I learned about the store's business, the more I noticed strange things. I noticed, for example, that my father kept 2 sets of books, the official one that he showed to the authorities and the real one where he recorded what actually came in and went out. There were also the monthly visits from a man named Johnny Marks, a burly man with a scar on his face who owned a distribution company. Whenever he came, my father would get nervous, agitated. The meetings happened behind closed doors, and afterward, my father would usually drink more than normal. Gradually, piecing together fragments of conversations overheard behind doors and documents I examined in secret, I understood that my father owed a lot of money to Johnny, and the debt was only growing. I also realized that he was falsifying the books to pay less than he owed, in a fraud that had been going on for years. And most importantly, I discovered that Johnny wasn't the type of man you trifle with. I had heard stories about people who displeased him and simply disappeared. They said he had connections with bootleggers from Louisiana, that his henchmen weren't afraid to get their hands dirty. He was the type of man who solved problems in his own way, without involving the police. All these discoveries stayed tucked away in a corner of my mind, like pieces of a puzzle that I didn't yet know I would assemble. I kept learning, observing, storing information. I also continued protecting my sisters as best I could, especially Sarah, who was growing up beautiful and cheerful, oblivious to the danger hovering over her. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before he turned his eyes to the youngest. It was a pattern I knew all too well. And the day I feared most came when I was 16. It was on a hot January night, one of those when the heat doesn't let up even after the sun goes down. My mother had been sedated after a particularly bad day. Betty and I were in the kitchen washing the dinner dishes. Sarah, with her 7 little years, had already been put to bed in the bedroom we shared. Suddenly, I noticed my father wasn't in the living room where he usually sat listening to the radio after dinner. An alarm sounded in my head. I dropped the plate I was drying and ran silently to the hallway. That's when I saw him standing at the door of our room, looking inside with that expression I knew so well. The same expression he had when he looked at me years ago, when it all began. My blood froze in my veins. Not her, not Sarah, I thought. She was just a child, an innocent girl who still played with rag dolls. She adored her father, ran into his arms when he came home from the store, told him stories from school. He couldn't do this to her. He couldn't destroy that light, that joy. Without thinking, I advanced. "Daddy," I called, louder than I intended. He turned, surprised at being caught in the act. For a moment, I saw something like shame on his face, quickly replaced by anger. He grabbed my arm forcefully, dragging me back to the kitchen. Betty was paralyzed in the same spot, the dish towel still in her hands, her eyes wide with fear. "What do you think you're doing, spying on me?" he growled through his teeth. "Leave her alone," I said, with a courage I didn't know I had. "Sarah is just a child. Please, leave her alone." He looked at me like I was an annoying fly that needed to be squashed. Then he laughed, a humorless laugh that gave me chills. "And who's gonna stop me? You? That useless mother of yours who lives doped up? Or are you gonna call the police and tell them what? That respected Mr. Walter, who helps everyone, who goes to church every Sunday, abuses his daughters? Who's gonna believe you, you little fool?" I knew he was right. In our small town, his word was worth more than mine. He was the successful merchant, the respected man. I was just a girl, the daughter of an unstable woman. I could scream, I threatened, even knowing it was useless. Again, he laughed. "Go ahead and scream. I'll start with the little one tomorrow. I won't wait any longer. And then I'll take care of you and the other one. Accidents happen, you know. Girls fall down wells. Houses catch fire at night with everyone asleep." The threat hung in the air, more real than anything. He would be capable of it, I knew. It wasn't just our honor at stake, it was our lives. I lowered my head, defeated. He released my arm, leaving red marks of his fingers on my skin. "Good. Now get back to the dishes and forget what you saw. And if you open your mouth..." He left the sentence hanging in the air, but the message was clear. He left the kitchen, returning to the living room and turning on the radio as if nothing had happened. Betty and I stood there in silence, mechanically finishing the dishes. But inside me, something had changed. A decision was forming, cold and clear as crystal. That night, lying in the dark beside my sisters, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying in my mind everything I knew about my father, about Johnny, about the doctored accounting books. Gradually, a plan began to take shape. If the justice of men didn't work for girls like us, maybe I could use other methods that a man like Johnny Marks would understand very well. I was only 16, but that night I aged decades, making a decision that would change my life forever. If it was to protect my sisters, especially little Sarah, I would do whatever was necessary, even if it meant staining my hands with my own father's blood. But wait a minute. I think I've gotten ahead of myself too much. Let me take you back to Millbrook, Alabama in the 1950s, where I grew up. The streets were still unpaved dirt roads that turned to mud pits when it rained. Most houses were wooden, painted in bright colors, blue, green, yellow, to brighten the view. Ours, behind the store, was white with blue windows. The town center had the church square with a gazebo where the little band played on Sundays after service. Men would gather in front of Hank's barbershop discussing politics and baseball, while women left church whispering about other people's business. Children ran free, playing tag and hide and seek until the dinner bell rang. Our house wasn't big, but it wasn't small compared to others in the neighborhood. It had a living room, kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a back area where Mama washed clothes when she was well enough. The floor was wooden planks that creaked when we stepped on them. The windows had curtains that Mama sewed herself before getting sick. What marked the house most was the smell. That mixture of freshly ground coffee and sugar coming from the store that permeated everything. The walls, the furniture, our clothes. Sometimes when I'm homesick for those times, the few good moments, of course, I close my eyes and can still smell that aroma. Daddy was a tall man with broad shoulders, a well-trimmed mustache, and hair always slicked back with Brill cream. He dressed well even on weekdays: linen pants, white shirt, polished shoes. He walked with his head held high, greeted everyone with that broad smile that showed his white, perfect teeth. Every Sunday, he went to church, sat in the first row, sang hymns with a strong voice. At town gatherings, he always donated money. When someone needed help, he'd loan supplies from the store, sometimes not even charging the poorest families. "What goes around comes around," he'd say. God is watching. People respected him, called him Mr. Walter, tipped their hats when he passed by, sent their children to call me Mr. Walter's daughter, as if it were a title of nobility. At home, he was different. He had that look of someone who's always dissatisfied, as if the house wasn't clean enough, the food wasn't tasty enough, the daughters weren't obedient enough. He'd beat us for anything. A broken glass, unfinished homework, an answer he thought was sassy. Over time, I learned to read his moods by the sound of his footsteps, by the way he opened the door, by his tone of voice when he called for Mama. There were good days and bad days, but even on good ones, we walked on eggshells. My mother, Mary, was a beautiful woman when young. I have few memories of her genuinely smiling, but when she did, she lit up the room. She had light blue eyes like mine, long hair that she cut herself, fair skin that burned easily in the sun. Before I was born, from what I heard from neighbors, she was cheerful, loved to sing while working. Then she withered gradually, like a flower without water. It started with what she called the endless sadness, periods when she'd stay in bed for days, staring at the ceiling. Then came the medicine prescribed by the town doctor, dark little bottles with drops that left her dazed, limp, with vacant eyes. She slept a lot, talked little. Sometimes she'd go days without changing clothes or combing her hair. On good days, increasingly rare as the years passed, she managed to get up, do household chores, cook. That's when she'd make chess pie that I loved so much. The sweet smell would take over the entire house, and she'd let us scrape the bottom of the pan when she finished. The taste was different from any other dessert, creamy with that little bit of burned caramel that gives it a special flavor. After she got worse, I could never eat chess pie the same way again. It seems like she took the secret with her. My sister Betty arrived 2 years after me. She was a quiet girl with big eyes that always seemed frightened, as if perpetually waiting for something bad to happen. She didn't smile much, talked little, got startled by any loud noise. From an early age, she had a special way of observing everything, of understanding things without anyone needing to explain. She picked things up from the air. When it was just the two of us, before Sarah was born, she was my shadow, following me everywhere. At night, we had a secret ritual. I'd tell made-up stories before bed, stories about places far away where girls could run free without fear. Sarah came 7 years after me, when Mama was already quite sick. She was a surprise to everyone. Nobody thought she could still have children after so much time. The pregnancy was difficult. Mama spent almost the entire time in bed. But when my baby sister was born, she brought light into the house. She was a chubby baby with rosy cheeks and curious eyes. As she grew, she showed a strong personality, talkative, smiling, stubborn. She sang all day, invented games, asked questions about everything. She was the joy of the house, the only thing that could draw genuine smiles from my father. With her, he had patience he never had with me or Betty. He'd let her climb on his lap just to tell a story or show a drawing. He treated her differently. Back then, I thought it was because she was the baby, the doll of the house. Today I know he was just waiting for the right moment. Johnson's General Store was on Millbrook's Main Street, a corner building painted light blue with the name written in black letters. It had a wide door in front and 3 large windows protected by ornate iron bars. Inside was a world of wonders for a child. Shelves from floor to ceiling full of colorful products, cans of peach preserves, jars of candy, sacks of flour, rice and beans, bottles of soda pop. In the center was a long, dark wood counter, polished by use, where my father served customers. In the right corner was a large brass scale that made a distinctive noise when weighing products. In the back was the storeroom full of sacks piled to the ceiling, rice, beans, coffee, sugar, flour. and a small office where my father did the accounting and kept the money. The store was more than a shop. It was the heart of the neighborhood. People didn't just go there to buy things. They went to talk, to hear news, to ask for advice. My father knew everyone by name, knew the life of each family. How's your mama? Did her cough get better? Did your son get that job in Birmingham? Is the crop going to be good this year? It was there that politics was discussed, where marriages and funerals were commented on, where gossip spread. Did you hear that the Silva girl ran off with the cobbler's son? They say the new preacher has a thing with the school teacher. The store opened early at 6 a.m. and closed late at 8 p.m., only closing earlier on Sundays. I started helping from a young age, first just sweeping the floor and arranging the lower shelves, then waiting on customers, weighing merchandise, making packages. By 9, I knew how to do mental math, give change, take orders. My father said I had a head for business, and that filled me with pride. Those were rare moments when he praised me. It was in the store that I learned to read people, the way Mrs. Garcia clutched her purse when talking about her husband. How old, Mr. Jenkins lowered his eyes when asking for more time to pay his bill, how the Pereira girl always came with marks on her arms just like mine. I learned that everyone has secrets, that behind the closed doors of even the nicest houses, sometimes the ugliest things happen. The first signs that something was wrong with my father, I noticed, without understanding what they meant. There was the way he looked at me when Mama was bedridden, a different look that made me want to hide. The way he started asking more and more for me to stay at the store after hours helping close the register while sending everyone else home. How he began to compliment my hair, my legs, saying I was becoming a pretty young lady. At the time, I thought that was just his way, that all fathers must do this. Now I know he was preparing me, testing me, seeing how far he could go. There was one specific day I'll never forget. I was getting some boxes from the highest shelf, using a little stool. Suddenly I felt his hand on my waist. "Careful not to fall," he said, but the hand didn't leave. It stayed there, squeezing lightly, moving up and down my side. I froze in place, not knowing what to do. It didn't seem right, but he was my father. He had to know what was right, didn't he? When I finally managed to move and got down from the stool, he smiled that strange way and said, "You're growing up so fast, Ellie. Soon you'll be a woman." Another time, he called me to the small office in the back of the store. It was the end of the day. We had already closed. Mama was having one of her bad days, hadn't left the bed. Betty had stayed home to look after her and Sarah. I entered the office that smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco. He was sitting in the big leather chair, counting the day's money. He told me to close the door and sit in the chair in front of the desk. He began to ask me questions about school, about the boys in my class, if any of them had tried to mess with me. He said that as a father, he needed to protect me from these dangers. While he talked, he got up and came behind my chair, putting his hands on my shoulders. He began to massage in a way that made me uncomfortable. His hands moved down my arms, then back to my shoulders, then started to move down the front. That's when I jumped up, saying I needed to go home, that Betty must be needing help. He let me go. But in the days that followed, he was cold to me, giving me the worst chores in the store, like cleaning the dusty storeroom or carrying heavy bags. And then came the day that changed everything. I had just turned 12. It was late afternoon. The store had already closed at that hour when the sunlight turns orange, coming through the cracks in the window, making dust particles dance in the air. The only employee who was still there, Mr. Gerald, had left to deliver an order on the other side of town. The little bell on the door was still echoing after he left, leaving a heavy silence that seemed to swallow everything. It was just my father and me in that store that suddenly seemed both immense and suffocating at the same time. As always, he asked me to help close the register, count the money, write in the book. We were both behind the dark wooden counter, worn by time. I was standing on a stool with my feet dangling in the air, stretching my neck to reach the cash book. The pencil trembled slightly in my small hand as I wrote the numbers in that round handwriting of a diligent child. My father was sitting in his chair, the one that creaked every time he moved, watching me work with a different look that made the back of my neck tingle, even though I wasn't looking directly at him. The tick-tock of the clock on the wall seemed louder that late afternoon. Outside, the last sounds of the street were diminishing. Suddenly, I heard his chair creak louder. "Come here, daughter. Sit on Daddy's lap." His voice came out gentle, like someone offering candy, but there was something underneath, something that made my stomach tie in a knot. I thought it strange. I was already 12, no longer a baby to sit on laps. But I obeyed, as I always did. I had learned early that disobeying father meant trouble, and trouble with him always left marks. When I sat down, he hugged me from behind, pressing me against him in a way that made me feel suffocated, as if all the air had been expelled from my lungs. His smell enveloped me, sweat mixed with that cheap cologne and something else, something sour that only later would I understand was desire. His large, rough hands, like sandpaper, with those thick fingers full of calluses from work, began to touch me over my clothes, first on the arms, in a circular movement that went up and down, then on the stomach, the fingers spreading like spiders over the thin fabric of my dress. And then they went higher, higher to places that made me freeze inside. My body went rigid as a board. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it would come out of my mouth. My mind was screaming, but my voice disappeared. Confused images passed through my head. My mother lying in her bed motionless, my sisters waiting for me at home, the rag doll I had left in the yard, anything but what was happening there at that moment. When I tried to get up, pushing with my small hands against his legs, he held me forcefully, one hand on my waist, squeezing until it hurt, the other covering my mouth with so much pressure that I tasted blood where my teeth cut the inside of my lip. "You stay real quiet now," he whispered in my ear, so close that I felt his stubble scraping against my cheek, leaving the skin burning. His hot breath, heavy with bourbon, something he normally only drank after dinner, enveloped me like a toxic cloud. "This is our secret, you hear? If you tell anyone, especially your mama, she's gonna have such a bad spell that she'll die, and it'll be your fault." That first time, he just touched me over my clothes. But it was enough to leave me in shock, as if lightning had struck me, leaving my whole body tingling with horror. When he finally let me go, my legs were numb. I could barely feel the floor under my feet. I ran home as if the devil himself were at my heels, the world around a blur of distorted images and sounds. I stumbled through the kitchen door, ignoring my mother's call, locked myself in the bathroom, and stayed there trembling like a leaf in the wind, holding my knees, tears silently streaming as I bit my fist to make no sound. I stayed like that until my sister Betty knocked on the door, the doorknob turning one way then the other. "Ellie, are you all right?" Her thin voice, worried, seemed to come from another world. I couldn't answer. Only when I heard my father's footsteps arriving home did I force myself to get up, opening the faucet with hands that didn't seem like mine. I filled the bathtub with almost scalding water, the way my mother always told me not to do, and got in fully dressed. I took a bath that seemed to last hours, scrubbing my skin with that coarse soap until it was red and stinging, feeling as if a kind of invisible dirt had entered through my pores, a dirt that would never come out no matter how much I scrubbed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay looking at the ceiling, trying to understand what had happened, why my own father would do such a thing. Was it normal and I just didn't know? Was it my fault? Had I done something to provoke this? The questions spun in my head without answer. Shame and fear ate at me from the inside. I felt disgusted with myself, as if there was something wrong with me that made people treat me this way. The following day at school, I couldn't pay attention to anything. The teacher even asked if I was sick because I was so quiet. Me, who was normally so participative. During recess, I stayed alone in a corner watching the other girls play, feeling as if I was no longer one of them, as if I now belonged to another world, a world of dirty secrets and shame. When I returned home that afternoon, I gathered all the courage I had and tried to talk to my mother. It was one of those rare days when she was out of bed, sitting in the kitchen peeling potatoes for dinner. She seemed more lucid than usual, so I thought it was my chance. I approached slowly, my heart beating so hard I thought she could hear it. "Mama," I began, my voice barely coming out. "I need to tell you something." She raised her eyes from the potatoes, looking at me with that vacant expression she had most of the time. "What is it, Ellie?" I swallowed hard, gathering all my courage. "Daddy, he did something to me yesterday. Something strange." I began to tell, without using specific words, because I didn't even know how to name what had happened. I just described how he had made me sit on his lap, how he had touched me in a way that made me uncomfortable. As I spoke, I saw her face changing. First confusion, then an expression I couldn't decipher at the time. But today I know was fear mixed with denial. Before I could finish, she interrupted me, her voice firmer than I expected. "You're making up stories, girl. Your father is a good man. We're lucky to have him. Many a woman around here can't say the same." I tried to insist, to say I wasn't making it up, that it had really happened, but she got up abruptly, dropping the potatoes on the floor. "Enough! I don't want to hear any more of these lies. Go to your room right now." I went, tears streaming down my face, a lump in my throat. That night, I heard them arguing in their bedroom, his voice loud, irritated, hers lower, pleading. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but the next morning, Mama had a bruise on her face that she tried to hide with her hair. She didn't look me in the eye all day. 2 days later, she had one of her attacks and went back to bed, this time staying there for almost a month. I learned the lesson. I had no one to turn to. My own mother didn't believe me, or worse, maybe she did believe, but was so afraid she preferred to pretend it wasn't true. What else could I do? We were dependent on him. He was the provider, the respected merchant. I was just a girl. Who would believe me against his word? In the years that followed, the abuse continued, always hidden, always with threats of what would happen if I told anyone. When Betty turned 7, I realized she had also become a target. She returned from the store one day with that same empty look I knew too well, her eyes red from crying, shrinking when anyone came near. I didn't need to ask to know what had happened. That night I hugged her in the bed we shared and promised that one day we would get out of there. I didn't know how, when, or where, but I swore I would find a way. The only good thing that happened in those years was Sarah's birth. When she arrived, I was already 9, almost 10, old enough to help take care of her, to be a second little mother when Mama couldn't cope. From the first day, I made a silent promise to that small, noisy thing. I won't let him touch you. Never. Whenever I could, I kept her with me or with Betty. I invented excuses not to leave her alone with him, even when she was just a baby. As the years passed, fear gave way to a dull anger that grew inside me like a gathering storm. Anger at him, obviously, but also at my mother who chose to look the other way, at the neighbors who must have suspected. The walls were too thin not to hear the screams, the marks too visible not to notice, at the entire world that allowed men like my father to continue living their normal lives while destroying ours. I often wonder what you would have done in my place, honey, if the only person who could protect you pretended not to hear your cries for help. If you were trapped in a situation with no way out, with 2 little sisters to protect, what would you do? Because when you're a child, 9, 10, 11 years old, the adult world seems so big, so powerful. You don't know your rights, don't know there are laws that should protect you. You only know you're alone against a giant, and that no one will believe your word against his. That's how I spent my childhood and early adolescence. By day, the obedient daughter, the good student, the efficient helper at the store. By night, the girl who trembled under the covers, who hugged her sisters trying to protect them, who hid in dark corners when she heard his footsteps approaching. I learned to live that way, divided into 2 different people, the one the world saw and the one that existed inside, full of fear and shame. I grew up too fast, losing my innocence much earlier than I should have. While other girls my age were still playing with dolls, I was already carrying secrets too heavy for my narrow shoulders. Today, at my age, after all I've seen and lived through, I know my story isn't unique. There are many Ellies out there, children who suffer in silence, who have no one to turn to. That's why I decided to tell my story, not for revenge, because the man who hurt me hasn't lived for decades, not for self-pity, because it's been a long time since I overcame that, but so other girls know they're not alone, that there is a way out, that it's possible to survive and even be happy despite everything. I survived. It wasn't easy. It wasn't without scars, but I survived. I built a life he never imagined I could have. I managed to protect my sisters, at least from part of the horror he could have caused. And if my story helps even one girl find the courage to seek help, then it's worth reliving these painful memories, worth opening these old wounds to show that they've healed. Not perfectly, of course. Scars are never invisible. But they've healed enough for me to tell this story today, looking into the eyes of those watching me without the pain destroying me again. But this was just the beginning of the story, because the worst was yet to come, the failed escape attempt, the discovery that little Sarah would be the next victim, and finally the plan that would change our lives forever. It was no longer a question of enduring and surviving. It was a matter of life or death, his or ours, and at 16, I made the most difficult and definitive decision of my life. The abuse followed a pattern that took me years to recognize, always at the same times, always in the same places. It was as if my father had a perfectly timed double life. During the day, the respected merchant. At night, or in moments when no one was looking, the monster. He preferred late afternoon when the store was closing. He'd send Mr. Gerald and the other employees home earlier, saying that I would help close up. Ellie already knows how to do everything. No need for everyone to stay. Nobody questioned it. After all, what harm could there be in a daughter helping her own father? The storeroom in the back of the store was his favorite place. It was dark, away from the street, with those high sacks of supplies that muffled any sound. The smell of coffee and flour permeated everything, mixed with the odor of mildew from the darkest corners. There was an old desk where he did the accounting, and it was there, on that rough, cold wood, that I lost my innocence completely. Sometimes, when Mama was hospitalized, which happened with increasing frequency, he would come to our room late at night after Betty fell asleep. In those moments, I would pretend to sleep, breathing as shallowly as possible, as if I could disappear if I stayed very still. It rarely worked. As the years passed, he became bolder, more violent. What started with touches over clothes evolved into things I can't even describe without feeling my stomach turn. He seemed to take pleasure not just from the act itself, but from the power he exercised, from the fear he caused. "You're mine," he would whisper in my ear while I bit my lips not to scream. "Only mine. You'll never escape." And I believed him. How could I not? Each attempt at resistance resulted in punishment, not just for me, but for my sisters too. I learned to disconnect, to send my mind elsewhere while my body stayed. I imagined I was floating above, watching the scene from a distance, as if it were happening to someone else. It was on an ordinary day that I discovered Betty was also a victim. I had already suspected. The way she shrank when he approached, the nightmares that made her wake up screaming in the middle of the night, the purple marks that sometimes appeared on her arms. But like so many things in that house, it was a forbidden subject, something we pretended not to see until that afternoon. I was coming home from school early. The teacher had been absent, and they released our class. Betty, 2 years younger, should still have been in school. But when I entered the room we shared, she was there, huddled in the corner of the bed, hugging her knees, rocking back and forth. She had dried tears on her face, and that empty look I knew too well. "Betty, what happened? Why aren't you at school?" She didn't answer, continued rocking as if she didn't hear me. I approached slowly, sat on the edge of the bed without touching her. I knew from my own experience that in that state, any touch could cause panic. "It's okay, Betty. It's me, Ellie. You're safe now." Slowly she raised her eyes. "He said the teacher sent me home," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible. "Said it was time for my special lesson. But it wasn't any lesson, Ellie. She couldn't finish. She didn't need to. I understood exactly what had happened. At that moment, something inside me changed. One thing was him doing that to me. I was already ruined, dirty, marked. But Betty, my little sister who still played with dolls, who cried when she saw a dead bird, who was afraid of the dark, it was too much. I hugged her, letting her cry on my shoulder until she soaked my whole blouse, and made a silent promise. I would protect her and Sarah, whatever it took. From that day on, Betty and I made a pact without words. We never spoke openly about what was happening, but we developed a system, signals with the eyes, codes in everyday phrases. "Got a headache today, Ellie?" Meant he was in that mood. "Be careful. I'm going to help Mama with her medicine. was stay close to Sarah. Don't leave her alone. Small gestures that kept us a little safer, a little more sane in an insane world. Sarah, our baby sister, was too innocent to understand the danger surrounding her. With her big eyes and easy smile, she adored her father, ran to him when he came home from the store, sat on his lap without fear. Every time this happened, my heart froze. Betty and I took turns to always have someone watching her. The excuse was that we were helping to care for her since Mama couldn't cope. In reality, it was a constant, desperate vigil. We invented games to keep her always close, never alone with him. Let's play school, Sarah. You be the student. Want to help make biscuits? You can cut the dough. Anything to keep her by our side, away from his clutches. We didn't give up seeking help, even knowing deep down it was futile. I tried to talk to the teacher once, Miss Jefferson, an older lady who seemed to like me. Miss Jefferson, I began after class when everyone had already left. There are things that happen in my house, things that aren't right. She looked at me with an expression that mixed curiosity and discomfort. What kind of things, Ellie? I couldn't say it directly. The words got stuck in my throat. I tried to give hints. My father, he does things when no one is looking. Things a father shouldn't do with a daughter. She turned red, looked away, began gathering her books hurriedly. Look, Ellie, sometimes we don't understand parents' attitudes. They do what's best for us, even when it doesn't seem that way. Your father is a respected man in the community. I'm sure he only wants what's best for you. And she changed the subject, asking about homework. I left the classroom feeling like I'd been slapped. Another closed door, another adult choosing not to see. At confession, I tried to talk to Father Martin, a white-haired gentleman who seemed kind during sermons. Father, I need to confess something, but I don't know if it's my sin or someone else's. He encouraged me to continue. Protected by the darkness of the confessional, stammering, I told a softened version of what was happening, without using explicit words, talking about inappropriate touches and things that make me feel dirty. I expected understanding, guidance, perhaps even concrete help. What I received was a lesson on the fourth commandment. Honoring father and mother is God's law, my child. Sometimes parents are strict because they love us and want to educate us in the right path. Say 3 Hail Marys and ask forgiveness for your impure thoughts. I left the church feeling even more guilty, more confused. If even God's representative on earth thought I was wrong, maybe it was true. Maybe there was something in me that provoked it, that deserved that treatment. It took years for me to understand that the fault was never mine, that no child deserves or provokes abuse. My last hope was Grandma Hazel, my mother's mother, who lived on a farm a few hours from Millbrook. She rarely came to visit, more to see how her daughter was doing than for any other reason. She was a tough woman, raised on a farm, who had buried 3 husbands and raised 6 children practically alone. If anyone could stand up to my father, I thought, it would be her. During one of her visits, I found the courage. I waited until we were alone, she washing dishes and me drying. Grandma, I began, my voice trembling. I need to tell you something about Daddy. She continued washing without looking at me. What about him? I swallowed hard and let it all out at once, knowing I might not have another chance. I told her about the touches, the abuse, the constant fear, how he did the same thing to Betty, and how we feared for Sarah. She listened in silence, her wrinkled hands continuing to wash the plates as if we were talking about the weather. When I finished, still breathless from the effort of telling everything, she sighed deeply. Finally, she turned to me, drying her hands on her apron. Her eyes showed no shock or anger, just a tired resignation that scared me more than any other reaction. Men are just like that, Sugar, she said, as if she were teaching me a cake recipe. They have these appetites. Your mama knows it. I knew it with my husbands, too. We endure because what else are you going to do? Where are you going to go with children to feed and no money? She put her hand on my shoulder in a gesture that should have been comforting, but only made me feel more alone. If you want advice from someone who's lived a long time, learn to dodge, to predict when danger's coming, and when you can't avoid it, close your eyes and think of something else. It'll pass soon enough. Those words were like a bucket of cold water. My own grandmother, who should protect me, was telling me to accept the unacceptable, to conform to the horror as if it were just another inconvenience of life. That's when I truly realized how alone I was. The women in my family had been so broken by life, so conditioned to accept abuse as normal, that they couldn't even imagine it could be different. Meanwhile, my mother sank deeper and deeper into her illness. Her nervous problems worsened to the point where she barely left the bed. The medicine, bitter drops that Dr. Wilson renewed without questioning, left her in an almost vegetative state. There were days when she didn't even recognize her own daughters, looking at us with empty eyes as if we were strangers. Other days, she had hallucinations, saw people who weren't there, conversed with the dead. But sometimes, rare times, she had moments of lucidity. During one of these moments, I entered her room to bring her some chicken broth I had made. She was sitting on the bed looking out the window, seeming more present than usual. I approached carefully, never knowing which version of my mother I would find. "Brought you some food, Mama. Chicken broth the way you like it." She turned her face to me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt she really saw me. Her eyes, so much like mine, were full of tears. "Ellie," she said, her voice weak but clear, "forgive me." The question caught me by surprise. "Forgive you for what, Mama?" She took my hand in hers, her thin fingers cold as dry twigs. "For not protecting you, for not protecting y'all. I know what he does. I've always known. Only I don't have the strength, Ellie. I got nowhere to go, no way to take care of you girls by myself. He said if I said anything, he'd take you away from me, send you far away, and I believed him." I remained frozen, not knowing what to say. Part of me wanted to scream at her, blame her for all those years of silent suffering. Another part understood the fear, the powerlessness, the lack of options. Before I could respond, she continued, the words coming out fast as if she feared not having time to say everything. "Your father is a good man, Ellie. We're lucky. That's what I have to say, what he makes me say. But it ain't true. It never was." It was the last lucid conversation we had. The next day, she was back to her usual state, too drugged to form complete sentences. 2 weeks later, she had another collapse and was hospitalized again. When she returned, she was just a shadow of the person she once was. Her last years were like that, alternating between hospitalizations and almost catatonic states at home. She died when I was 17, without recovering from a pneumonia that in someone with more will to live might not have been fatal. Now, before I tell you what happened after that beating we took when we tried to escape, let me explain something I discovered about the store's business. It was around this time that I started learning accounting from Mr. Tibbs, the gentleman who came once a month to do the books for the store. My father realized I had a knack for numbers and thought he could save money if I took over this role. Mr. Tibbs was a quiet, gentle old man who never asked questions when he saw bruises on my arms or shadows under my eyes. He taught me everything about bookkeeping, how to track inventory, record sales, manage the ledgers. As I became more familiar with the accounts, I noticed something strange. There were actually 2 sets of books. One official set that my father showed to suppliers and tax collectors, and another hidden set with the true numbers. I also began to observe the monthly visits from Johnny Marks, a tough-looking man with a nasty scar who ran a wholesale distribution business. Whenever Johnny came to visit, my father would get nervous, clear the store early, and lock himself in the office with Johnny and 2 mean-looking men who always accompanied him. Through careful eavesdropping and examining papers when no one was looking, I pieced together the truth. My father was deeply in debt to Johnny Marks, who wasn't just a distributor, but a loan shark known for his violent methods of collection. The stories circulating about Johnny were chilling. A shopkeeper who didn't pay and mysteriously had his store burned down, a farmer who tried to cheat him and was found in a cotton field with his hands cut off, a family that simply disappeared after the father accumulated debts too large to pay. To make matters worse, my father was trying to deceive Johnny by keeping 2 sets of books. He showed Johnny records indicating smaller sales than were actually happening, skimming money off the top. It was a dangerous game that only delayed the inevitable. The debt kept growing, interest accumulating, and Johnny wasn't a man of infinite patience. This whole situation fermented in my head like formless information, but without clear contours. I knew there was a possibility there, a potential weapon, but I didn't know exactly how to use it. It took a catalyst event for the pieces to finally fit together, And that event came in the form of my greatest fear, the threat to Sarah. It was on a hot January night, one of those when the heat doesn't give up even after the sun goes down. My mother had been sedated after a particularly bad day. Betty and I were in the kitchen washing the dinner dishes. Sarah, with her 7 little years, had already been put to bed in the bedroom we shared. Suddenly, I noticed my father wasn't in the living room, where he usually sat listening to the radio after dinner. An alarm sounded in my head. I dropped the plate I was drying and ran silently to the hallway. That's when I saw him standing at the door of our room, looking inside with that expression I knew so well. The same expression he had when he looked at me years ago, when it all began. My blood froze in my veins. Not her, not Sarah, I thought. She was just a child, an innocent girl who still played with rag dolls. She adored her father, ran into his arms when he came home from the store, told him stories from school. He couldn't do this to her. He couldn't destroy that light, that joy. Without thinking, I advanced. "Daddy," I called, louder than I intended. He turned, surprised at being caught. For a moment, I saw something like shame on his face, quickly replaced by anger. He grabbed my arm forcefully, dragging me back to the kitchen. Betty was paralyzed in the same spot, the dish towel still in her hands, her eyes wide with fear. "What do you think you're doing, spying on me?" he growled through his teeth. "Leave her alone," I said, with a courage I didn't know I had. "Sarah is just a child. Please, leave her alone." He looked at me like I was an annoying fly that needed to be squashed. Then he laughed, a humorless laugh that gave me chills. "And who's gonna stop me? You? That useless mother of yours who lives doped up? Or are you gonna call the police and tell them what? That respected Mr. Walter, who helps everyone, who goes to church every Sunday, abuses his daughters. Who's gonna believe you, you little fool?" I knew he was right. In our small town, his word was worth more than mine. He was the successful merchant, the respected man. I was just a girl, the daughter of an unstable woman. I could scream, I threatened, even knowing it was useless. Again, he laughed. "Go ahead and scream. I'll start with the little one tomorrow. I won't wait any longer. And then I'll take care of you and the other one. Accidents happen, you know. Girls fall down wells. Houses catch fire at night with everyone asleep." The threat hung in the air, more real than anything. He would be capable of it, I knew. It wasn't just our honor at stake. It was our lives. I lowered my head, defeated. He released my arm, leaving red marks of his fingers on my skin. "Good. Now get back to the dishes and forget what you saw. And if you open your mouth..." He left the sentence hanging in the air, but the message was clear. He left the kitchen, returning to the living room and turning on the radio as if nothing had happened. Betty and I stood there in silence, mechanically finishing the dishes. But inside me something had changed. A decision was forming, cold and clear as crystal. That night, lying in the dark beside my sisters, Betty awake and vigilant like me, Sarah sleeping the innocent sleep of those who don't yet know the world's evil, my mind worked furiously, going over everything I knew about my father, the store, Johnny Marks. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. If the justice of men didn't work for girls like us, if the teacher looked the other way, if the priest preached obedience, if my grandmother advised resignation, if my own mother was too sick to protect us, then I would have to seek another kind of justice. Johnny Marks wasn't a man who forgave debts. He wasn't a man who accepted being cheated. If he discovered that my father was manipulating the books, showing smaller sales than were actually happening, hiding money, well, the stories that circulated about him weren't of mercy. And I had access to the books. I knew where my father hid the true records. I knew how the fraud worked. The decision formed clear and cold inside me. It wouldn't be easy. It would be extremely risky. But at that moment, lying in the dark with fear for my baby sister, overcoming even my fear for my own life, I knew what I needed to do. Pit Johnny Marks against my father. Let him do the dirty work that my 16-year-old hands couldn't do. If I couldn't count on the law of men, I would use the law of monsters. "Betty," I whispered in the dark, "I need to tell you something. I have a plan." And I began to explain while the stars shone indifferently through the small window of our room. silent witnesses to a decision that would change our lives forever. After that night when I saw Daddy approaching Sarah's room, I began to develop my plan. It wasn't something that appeared fully formed in my head. It grew gradually, like a plant slowly sprouting. In the days that followed, I observed with even greater attention the operations between my father and Johnny Marks. I paid attention to every detail, every word, every number in the accounting books. I already knew that my father kept two records, a false one that he showed to Johnny, and the true one that he kept locked in a false drawer under the desk in the office. The system was simple and effective. He recorded fewer goods received than actually arrived, declared lower sales than the real ones, and the difference went straight into his pocket. An old trick, but one that worked well in a time when supervision was practically non-existent in small towns like Millbrook. The problem was that the debt to Johnny was growing. The interest was outrageous, at least 20% per month, bare-faced loan sharking that few dared to question. Studying the true books when my father wasn't around, I discovered that he owed more than $5,000, a fortune for the time, money he didn't have and wouldn't have anytime soon, especially because he spent part of the hidden profits on gambling and women in Birmingham. Yes, the family man who went to church every Sunday had this other life that few knew about. The initial idea was simple: make Johnny discover he was being cheated. I thought this would cause a break between them, maybe greater pressure for debt payment, at most, a lawsuit for fraud. I didn't imagine, or maybe I didn't want to imagine, that the consequences would be so extreme, or perhaps deep down, I knew exactly what would happen. To this day, I can't answer that with certainty. For the plan to work, I needed to know the store's accounting system inside out. So for 3 months, I studied intensely, not just the books that Mr. Tibbs had taught me to handle, but also my father's hidden records. I observed how he altered the numbers, what codes he used to mark merchandise that didn't appear in the official records. I memorized values, dates, names of suppliers. It was like learning a secret language. Little by little, I started making small alterations. Nothing noticeable, just slight errors that could pass for the mistakes of someone who's learning. A number switched here, a wrong addition there. My father almost never checked. He trusted my talent with mathematics and was too busy with other problems. When he did notice something, I'd apologize, saying I was still learning. He'd grumble, correct it, and we'd move on. The next step was bolder. I created false receipts for merchandise that was never delivered. I used paper identical to what the store already had, imitated the signatures of suppliers that I saw on legitimate documents. It was meticulous work, done at night by candlelight when everyone was asleep. These false receipts suggested that my father had bought much more than was actually in stock, which to trained eyes would indicate embezzlement. The most complex part was creating the illusion that the money was going somewhere specific. In the records, I invented a bank account in my father's name at the First National Bank in Birmingham. Of course, the account didn't really exist, but on paper, it looked like he was regularly depositing large sums there. Proof that the money undeclared to Johnny was being saved, not just spent. All this work was done during moments when I was alone in the store, usually late afternoon when my father went out to take care of business in town, or on Sunday mornings when I claimed I needed to get ahead with work while he was at church. Betty was my sentinel, keeping watch to warn if he came back earlier than expected. It was in this process that I found an unexpected ally, Mrs. Gardner, the cook who came 3 times a week to prepare meals for the store employees. She was a woman in her 60s, a widow known for her skilled hands both in the kitchen and with medicinal herbs. Everyone respected Mrs. Gardner, even my father, perhaps the only human being he truly feared, because she knew stories about him from when he was a boy. We never spoke openly about what was happening. We didn't need to. She saw the bruises, the frightened looks, the way I shrank when my father approached. One day she caught me crying behind the storeroom after one of the encounters with my father. She didn't ask me anything, just sat beside me, put her hand on my shoulder, and said, "There are evils that can only be cured by cutting out the root, like a weed." From that day on, without us arranging anything, she began to help me. She would distract my father at crucial moments, calling him to taste a new recipe or complain about some spoiled groceries, giving me time to work on the books. It was also her who informed me about the exact dates of Johnny's visits. Her son worked as a loader for the supplier, so she always knew when he would come. "He's coming next Thursday," she told me one morning while kneading bread dough. "Heard my boy Theo saying his boss is especially angry this time. Seems like he found out other storekeepers who owe him are hiding money too." It was the cue I'd been waiting for. I had to act now, before Johnny lost his patience completely, before my father did something to Sarah. The pressure from both sides was mounting each day. It was a race against time. On the eve of Johnny's visit, I made the final alterations to the books. It was a hot Wednesday, the kind that makes sweat run down your back. My father had gone to handle business in Birmingham, leaving me in charge of the store. A sign of the trust he placed in me, ironically. Mrs. Gardner was in the kitchen preparing lunch for the employees, but in reality standing guard for me. I worked with trembling hands but a clear mind. First, I altered the official records, the ones my father showed to Johnny, making the discrepancies even more evident. Then I modified some entries in the true books, making it appear that he was diverting much more than he really was. About 30% more by my estimate. Next, I wrote an anonymous letter. I used the store's typewriter, wearing gloves to leave no fingerprints. Gloves I had stolen from Dr. Wilson during a visit he made to Mama. The letter was direct and brutal. "Mr. Marks, Walter Johnson has been cheating you for years. He keeps 2 sets of account books. The ones he shows you are false. The real ones are hidden in a fake drawer under the desk in the office, protected by a board that moves when you press the right corner. The money he doesn't declare goes to a secret account at First National Bank in Birmingham. He's already diverted more than $5,000. Check the delivery receipts. Many are forged. He laughs behind your back, saying you'll never find out. A friend who values justice." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in an unmarked envelope. Then I prepared the physical evidence. I left some of the false receipts forgotten on the desk, as if my father had been careless. I placed a fake list of bank deposits in a folder marked "Private" right above the true books in the secret drawer, which I deliberately made easier to find by loosening the mechanism that protected it. Finally, I arranged a falsified note with my father's handwriting, mentioning "fooling Jay once more" and diverting 15% to the account in B, leaving it partially visible among other papers. Everything was ready. The whole stage was set for the final scene. All that was missing was delivering the letter, but that would be the easiest part. Johnny always sent the same driver, a man of few words named Bud Mason, to warn my father that he would be arriving soon. He would come a few hours earlier, leave the message, and go. It was the perfect moment to deliver the envelope without raising suspicion. On Thursday at 3 p.m., as expected, Bud appeared at the store door. He received the usual message from my father. "Tell Mr. Walter the boss is coming at 6. As he was leaving, I approached, pretending to dust a nearby shelf. "Mister," I called softly, "this fell out of your pocket," and I handed him the envelope. He looked confused but took it without questioning and left. It had worked. The letter was now on its way to Johnny. I went back inside, my heart beating so hard I thought everyone could hear it. All that was left was to wait. My father returned from Birmingham around 4, looking tired but satisfied, probably after spending part of the diverted money on his vices in the city. "Everything in order at the store?" he asked, more out of habit than real interest. "All fine, Daddy," I replied, lowering my eyes as I always did in his presence. "Mr. Budd came by, said Mr. Marks is coming at 6. He frowned, a crease of worry appearing between his eyebrows. "I'll review the books before. Get everything ready in the office." It was a moment of panic. What if he discovered the alterations? If he noticed the planted documents, the whole plan would crumble, and the consequences for me would be terrible. With trembling hands, I arranged the books on the office desk, praying he wouldn't look beyond the surface. My father sat down and began to leaf through the official records, the ones he showed to Johnny. He frowned when he saw one of the alterations I had made, a sales value lower than it should be. "Something's wrong here," he muttered. "What, Daddy?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "This value for last week's coffee sales is different from what I remember." My stomach nodded. It was the moment of truth. "Let me see," I asked, looking over his shoulder. I pretended to analyze it for a moment, then slapped my forehead. Oh, I think that was my mistake. I must have switched the numbers when I copied from the draft. I can fix it right now. He studied me for a second, his penetrating eyes as if they could see through me. Finally, he shook his head. No time. Johnny's already on his way. Just be more careful, girl. This kind of mistake can cost dear. He had no idea how true those words were. At 6 o'clock sharp, as always, we heard the engine of Johnny's car. My father sent all the employees home except Mr. Gerald. For me, he had specific orders. Take your sisters to Mrs. Cotton's house and stay there until I send for you. I don't want any of you around during this meeting. It was exactly what I expected, what I had planned for. Yes, Daddy, I replied, already leaving to get Betty and Sarah, who were playing in the back of the store. As we left through the back door, I saw Johnny entering through the front, accompanied as always by Scarface Tom and Mex, his two enforcers. In his hands, I noticed the envelope I had given to Bud Mason. I took my sisters to Mrs. Cotton's house, our neighbor who always looked after us when my father needed us out of the way. She was a kind lady, but completely unaware of what was happening in our house. Will your daddy be long? She asked, as she always did. I think so, I replied, exchanging a significant look with Betty, who already suspected what was happening. He said it's an important meeting. Then I'll make you girls a snack. I've got fresh cornbread. She smiled, going to the kitchen, taking Sarah by the hand. As soon as she left, Betty moved closer. Is it today? She whispered. The plan, I confirmed with a nod. If it works, we'll never have to go back to that house. Never again, Betty. We'll never have to be afraid of him again. And if it doesn't work? She swallowed hard. I had no answer for that. If it didn't work, probably none of us would survive to tell the story. It will work, was all I could say. We spent the next few hours at Mrs. Cotton's house, eating cornbread, listening to the radio, pretending a normality that was millions of miles from our racing hearts. Sarah, innocent as always, played with her rag doll, oblivious to the drama unfolding. Betty and I could barely swallow the food, our eyes always returning to the clock on the wall. At 9 at night, when Mrs. Cotton was already preparing the beds for us to sleep there, we heard the sound of a car accelerating hard on the main street, passing in front of the house. I ran to the window in time to see Johnny's car, black, large, impossible to confuse with any other in Little Millbrook. I'll take the girls home, Mrs. Cotton, I said, surprising the good lady. But your daddy didn't send for you, she argued, concerned. He must have forgotten. He gets distracted after these business meetings. I lied, already gathering our things. Our house is just across the street. There's no danger. She hesitated, but finally agreed. All right then. But have your daddy come thank me tomorrow, she said, accompanying us to the door. We went out into the hot April night, the starry sky above us seeming indifferent to the human drama unfolding below. We took Sarah home, quickly putting her to bed. She was tired from playing and fell asleep almost instantly. Betty stayed with her while I returned to the store. The establishment was closed, the windows dark, the door locked. No sign of movement inside. I used the key I always carried, one of the advantages of being my father's trusted helper, and entered silently. The place was dark, but I knew every inch of it blindfolded. I didn't turn on any lights, moving by memory to the office in the back. The office door was ajar. I pushed it slowly, my heart almost coming out of my mouth. There was no one there, no sign of struggle, nothing out of place. The books were on the desk, open, the real ones, not the fake ones. The secret drawer was wide open. It was as if my father had been interrupted in the middle of an explanation. I left the store with the strange sensation that something big and irreversible had happened, but without knowing exactly what. I returned home to my sisters, and we waited. That was probably the longest night of my life, lying in bed, eyes open in the dark, ears alert for any sound that would indicate my father's return. But he didn't return. The next morning, around 6 o'clock, we heard a commotion in the street. Raised voices, people running. I jumped up, heart racing. From the window, I saw a group of neighbors gathered in front of the store. I quickly dressed and ran there, leaving Betty with the still sleeping Sarah. The store was surrounded by a small crowd. Mr. Jenkins, the barber, was the first to see me arriving, his face paling. "Child, go back home. This ain't something for you to see." But it was too late. Through the people, I saw two men carrying something out of the store. Something large, covered by a sheet that couldn't completely hide what was underneath. An arm hung out, lifeless. I recognized the gold ring my father always wore on his pinky finger. "What happened?" I asked, my voice strangely calm considering the inner tumult I felt. It was Mrs. Gardner who answered, appearing at my side like an apparition. Her eyes were serious, but there was no shock in them. "Your daddy was found in the storeroom, child. Looks like a settling of accounts, a business deal gone wrong." Sheriff Daniels, a fat man with a thick mustache who rarely involved himself in anything that might cause him trouble, was writing something in a notebook. When he saw me, he frowned. "That's Johnson's daughter," someone informed him. He approached, uncomfortably clearing his throat. "Sorry for your loss, miss," he said, unable to look me in the eyes. "Seems your daddy had a disagreement with someone. Probably that supplier who always came here." "Johnny Marks?" I replied automatically. The sheriff nodded. "That's right. We'll investigate, of course." But he let the sentence die in the air. Everyone knew nobody would investigate Johnny Marks. It would be filed away as just another settling of accounts for debts, like so many others in the region. They didn't ask where I was the previous night. They didn't question why my father would be alone in the store so late. They assumed it was just another case of a merchant who couldn't pay his debts and suffered the consequences. In small towns like Millbrook in those days, justice often turned a blind eye to certain crimes, especially when they involved powerful men like Johnny Marks. Only later, when I was allowed to enter the store and collect our belongings, did I understand what had really happened. The office I had seen intact the night before was now ransacked. The real accounting books had disappeared. On the wall near the desk were marks that looked like dark splashes. The storeroom floor had been recently washed, but you could still notice a darker stain in the corner where the boards met the wall. I didn't need to be a detective to understand what had happened there. My father had been confronted with evidence of his fraud. He had tried to explain, probably denied it at first, maybe even tried to blame someone else, perhaps me, his trusted helper. But Johnny wasn't a man to accept excuses. His justice was swift and final. In the days that followed, there was no formal wake. The body was quickly buried with few present besides the immediate family. Neighbors sent flowers and food, more out of pity for the poor orphaned girls than out of real regard for the deceased. The word spread was that Walter Johnson had been a victim of loan sharks. No one mentioned the possibility that the fraud in the accounting books might have been the work of someone other than him. Now tell me something. Do you think what I did was wrong? Causing the death of my own father, even knowing the monster he was? I was just a 16-year-old girl trying to protect my sisters the only way I could see. What would you have done in my place, knowing no one would believe you, that the police wouldn't do anything, that hell would continue? The weeks that followed were a blur of conflicting emotions. On one hand, there was immediate relief. Relief so intense, it sometimes made me feel guilty. I no longer needed to check every corner before entering a room. I no longer needed to sleep with my ears alert, waiting for footsteps in the hallway. I no longer needed to protect Betty or worry about what would happen to Sarah. On the other hand, there was the horror of knowing what I had done, of having been indirectly responsible for the death of a person, my own father. No matter what kind of monster he was, sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, remembering the body covered by the sheet being carried out of the store. Other times, I wondered if there had been an alternative, if I could have found another way out. But the answer was always the same. No, there wasn't. There was nowhere to run, no one who would believe us, no authority that would protect us. It was him or us. Guilt and the sense of justice mixed in strange ways. I didn't feel pleasure in what had happened, not even the satisfaction of revenge fulfilled. It was more as if an enormous weight had been removed, leaving behind an empty space I didn't know how to fill. I didn't feel joy or sadness. I felt that we could finally breathe, and that alone was worth any moral price I had to pay. Betty never directly asked me if I had anything to do with our father's death, but sometimes I would catch her looking at me with a strange expression, not of fear or disapproval, but of silent understanding, as if to say, "I know what you did, and I understand why." Sarah, thank God, was too young to really understand what had happened. We told her that Daddy had gone to heaven like Mama before him. What none of us knew at that moment was that my father's death, as terrible as it was, would be just the beginning of our journey. There was still the question of the store, the debts, our support. I was 16, Betty 14, Sarah just 7. How would we survive? Where would we live? What would become of 3 girls alone in a world that was rarely kind to women, especially the helpless ones? The answer would come in the following days, in the form of a surprising discovery, a discovery that would change our lives once again, opening the way for a future we could never have imagined while living under my father's shadow. In the days following my father's death, we had to deal with immediate practical matters. The store was drowning in debt, mainly to Johnny Marks, who surprisingly didn't disappear. On the contrary, he sent representatives to help with the transition. Of course, his help had a price. He wanted the store as partial payment for the debt. "The establishment is worth more than your daddy's debt, little lady," said Bud Mason, the same man to whom I had handed the fateful letter, now speaking as Johnny's official representative. "The boss is fair. He'll pay the difference, enough for you to settle elsewhere." We had no choice. I was still a minor, couldn't legally take over the business, and even if I could, I didn't want that place. It held too many memories, most of them bad. I accepted the offer, and the store was sold for a value that, although well below market, was still considerable. But the real surprise came when we discovered the life insurance. My father, that man who seemed to care about nothing but himself, had a robust policy. He probably took it out thinking of himself, ensuring he would have money if he became incapacitated. What he didn't foresee was that he would die first, and the money would go directly to his daughters. The amount was high enough to give us a new chance in life, far from there. It was Mr. Tibbs who suggested Atlanta. "It's a big city with more opportunities, and far enough away for you to start over without the weight of the past," he said, as he helped me organize the paperwork. It was also he who recommended a trusted lawyer to handle the matter of custody of my sisters. "It's not going to be easy, Ellie," Attorney Evaristo explained to me. "You're only 16. Normally, orphaned children go to a court-appointed guardian or to close relatives. Our only close relative is Grandma Hazel, and she's already too old to care for 3 girls," I argued, desperation giving me courage. "Besides, I've been the one taking care of them since our mother got sick years ago. We know how to manage." The legal battle was long and complicated. Mr. Evaristo moved mountains of papers, got testimonies from neighbors and acquaintances attesting to my maturity and ability to care for my sisters. The insurance money also weighed in our favor. With it, we could support ourselves without depending on charity. After almost 3 months of uncertainty, the judge finally granted me temporary custody, with the condition that I return to school and that we have regular visits from a social worker. It wasn't ideal, but it was enough to keep our little family together. In August 1958, we left Millbrook behind. Everything we had fit into 3 old suitcases. We boarded the bus to Atlanta with more fear than certainty, but with the determination of those who have nothing more to lose. Sarah, at 7, thought it was all a great adventure. Betty, at 14, was quiet as always, but her eyes had a new shine. Hope, perhaps. I, with my newly turned 16 years and the weight of the world on my shoulders, could only think about the next step, the next decision to make. Atlanta was a completely different world from the small Millbrook where we grew up, a planned city with wide avenues, modern buildings, an accelerated rhythm that frightened us in the first few days. We rented a small house in the West End, which at the time was still developing. It was simple, 2 bedrooms, living room, kitchen, and a bathroom. But to us, it was a palace. The main thing was that it had no ghosts, no bad memories hidden in every corner. With the help of Mr. Evaristo, who had contacts in the capital, I got a job as an office assistant in an accounting firm. The owner, Mr. Sullivan, was a pragmatic man who didn't care about my age, only about my ability with numbers. "I've never seen someone so young understand so much about accounting books," he commented on my first day, impressed with my knowledge. If he only knew how I had acquired that skill. My first salary barely covered basic expenses, but with the insurance money safely in the bank, we could live comfortably while I built a career. I enrolled Betty and Sarah in schools near our house. I myself returned to studying in the evening, determined to complete at least high school. It was at night school that I met Thomas. He was a volunteer math teacher, a young man of about 25, thin, with round glasses and an easy smile. From the beginning, I noticed how he had patience with slower students, how he explained the same concept several times without showing irritation. He was the opposite of everything I knew in men. In the first few weeks, we barely exchanged a few words. I was reserved, distrustful, kept my distance from everyone, especially men. But Thomas had a gentle way of approaching without pressure, without expectations. He began by offering extra help with the material. I had facility with practical accounting, but theoretical mathematics gave me trouble. I accepted reluctantly, more out of necessity than willingness. These extra lessons happened in the school library, always with other people around, a condition I imposed and that he respected without questioning. Little by little, between equations and theorems, I began to lower my guard. Thomas talked about his family in rural North Carolina, about how he had come to Atlanta seeking opportunities, about his dream of opening his own school one day. He spoke with passion about education, about how he believed knowledge could change lives. "And you, Ellie? What are your dreams?" he asked me one day after a study session. The question caught me by surprise. Dreams? I could barely think beyond the next bill to pay, the next meal to prepare. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "I guess I haven't had time to dream yet." He didn't insist, but from that day on, he began to lend me books, not just mathematics, but literature, history, philosophy. "To feed the dreams," he would say, with that smile that I gradually came to look forward to seeing. Our relationship grew slowly, at the pace I could bear. It took more than a year before I agreed to go out with him beyond the lessons. A walk in Piedmont Park with Betty and Sarah along, of course. It took another 6 months for the first kiss, a touch so light and respectful that it made me cry, not out of fear or sadness, but out of relief. Relief to discover that physical contact could be gentle, could be something desired, not something imposed. Thomas never pressured me for more than I could give, never questioned my limits, my fears, my silences. When I finally told parts of my story, not everything, never everything, he listened without judging, without trying to fix things, offering only his presence, his silent support. "You're the strongest person I've ever met, Ellie," was what he said when I finished speaking. Not pity, not horror, just sincere admiration. We married when I turned 23, a simple ceremony, just close family and a few friends. Betty, then 21, was radiant as maid of honor. Sarah, at 14, threw flowers down the aisle of the small church with an enthusiasm that drew smiles. It was a new beginning, a page turned. With Thomas's constant support, I managed to achieve dreams I didn't even know I had. I finished high school, then college, finally entering the education program at the newly established Georgia State University. I was one of the oldest students in the class, but also one of the most dedicated. Each class, each book, each piece of knowledge acquired was one more brick in building the woman I wanted to be, free, independent, capable of making a difference. I graduated as a teacher in 1970, at 28 years old. It was one of the happiest days of my life, seeing my sisters in the audience applauding with tears in their eyes. Thomas, holding our adopted daughter Joanna, a 3-year-old girl we had taken in after she lost her parents in an accident. It was an indescribable emotion. It was as if the circle had finally closed. The girl who had education denied to her could now educate others. I began teaching at a public school in the Atlanta outskirts. It was difficult work, with few resources, many students per class, but deeply rewarding. I soon realized that many of the children faced situations at home similar to what my sisters and I had experienced: abuse, neglect, violence. The difference was that I could see the signs, could understand what was happening behind the lowered gazes, the poorly explained bruises, the constant fear. That's how the idea of after-school tutoring emerged. I began offering extra classes on our house porch for children who needed it most. Not just academic help, but a safe space, someone who really cared. Thomas, who now taught mathematics at a private school, joined me in this endeavor. Soon, we had dozens of children coming every day after school. With time, we noticed that some girls were reluctant to go home. They would invent excuses to stay longer, ask to help with cleaning, with household chores, anything to delay their return. That's when we decided to adapt a room at the back of the house to accommodate one or another emergency. Just until we resolve the situation, we would say, not knowing we were planting the seed of what would become the New Dawn Center. Our second adopted daughter, Teresa, came this way, a 9-year-old girl who appeared on a rainy day, soaked, with evident signs of beatings. My stepfather said, "I'm not to come back no more," she told us between sobs. We took her in, first temporarily, then permanently, when it became clear that her mother, dominated by fear, would not stand up to her partner. As our work became known, more cases reached us. The back room was no longer enough. In 1975, with our savings and the help of friends, we bought a larger house, more adapted to receiving girls who needed shelter. That's when we formalized the New Dawn Center, initially as an NGO for after-school tutoring and family support, but which quickly evolved into a complete shelter for girls at risk. The years passed, and the center grew. From the simple house, we expanded to our own building in 1985, with the capacity to house up to 30 girls simultaneously. Beyond shelter, we offered psychological counseling, legal guidance for families, professional courses for teenagers, everything my sisters and I hadn't had access to when we needed it. Speaking of my sisters, each followed her own path, but we always maintained a strong bond. Betty, always the most introspective, found her vocation in religious life. At 25, she entered a convent of the Sisters of Charity. "I found peace here," she wrote to me in a letter, "a kind of peace I never thought possible for someone like me." Today she works with abandoned children in Alabama, transforming her own pain into care for others. Sarah, our baby sister, followed a path similar to mine. She also became a teacher but chose to work with early childhood education. "I want to catch them real young, before the world has a chance to hurt them," she always said. She married, had 3 children, built a happy and stable life in Florida. As the years passed, we had difficult conversations about the past, conversations that were only possible when we were all adults with emotional tools to process the trauma. Betty revealed details of what she had suffered at our father's hands, things that even suspecting, I never knew for certain. Sarah, who was spared the worst thanks to our intervention, had to deal with the discovery of what really happened in that house, of who the man she remembered as a loving father really was. And I could finally share part of the weight I carried. I told about how we had protected Sarah, about the failed attempts to ask for help, but I never fully revealed my role in our father's death. Some truths are too heavy to share, even with those we love most, or perhaps especially with those we love most. In 1990, almost 30 years after we left Millbrook, I decided it was time to confront the past once and for all. Thomas, always my support, offered to accompany me, but this was a journey I needed to make alone. "I'll be back tomorrow," I promised, kissing him at the bus station. Millbrook had changed a lot. From a small town in the interior, it had transformed into a bustling industrial city. The dirt streets of my childhood were now paved avenues. The commercial center where my father's store once stood was unrecognizable, taken over by modern shops and commercial buildings. My first destination was the cemetery. I had never visited my father's grave. At the time of the funeral, I was too busy trying to ensure our survival. It wasn't difficult to find the simple grave, since I had the exact location provided by the administration. A modest headstone with just name and dates, no flourishes or sentimental messages. I stood there for a few minutes in silence. I felt no anger, no sadness, no forgiveness, just a strange sense of closure, like closing a book whose story we know by heart. Then I went looking for some of the old neighbors who still lived in the city. Cotton, now a lady of more than 80 years, cried when she saw me, exclaiming how beautiful and successful I looked. It was during coffee at her house that I heard the first confessions. "I always suspected something was wrong in that house, you know," she said, lowering her voice as if it were still a secret. "The way you girls would startle at any noise, the screams at night that your daddy said were nightmares, the bruises you and Betty always had." She sighed heavily. "I should have done something, should have spoken up, asked, helped somehow. But in those days, We didn't meddle in family matters. Forgive me for that, child. It was the first of many similar conversations during that visit. The baker who noticed how we got nervous in Father's presence. The teacher who perceived our constant fear but never acted. The priest who regretted not investigating further when I made that veiled confession. Everyone suspected. Everyone had suspicions. No one did anything. The most impactful revelation came from a woman I barely remembered. Nancy, daughter of a merchant neighboring the store. Your daddy abused me too, she told me after inviting me to her house. When I was 12, I would sometimes help at the counter. He would call me to the storeroom, do things she didn't need to complete. I never told anyone. I was ashamed, afraid they wouldn't believe me. Only as an adult did I understand it wasn't my fault. Before leaving, I discovered that Nancy wasn't an isolated case. At least 3 other women of the same generation had similar stories about my father. All had kept quiet at the time. All had carried that burden alone. It was a painful reminder that monsters rarely have just one victim, and of how silence protects them, allowing them to continue causing pain. I returned to Atlanta with a heavy heart, but somehow lighter. I shared with Thomas what I had discovered about the neighbors who did nothing, about the other victims. He listened in silence, holding my hand. The important thing is that you broke the cycle, Ellie, he said finally. You transformed all that pain into something that helps other girls not go through the same. And it was true. Over the years, the New Dawn Center had become a national reference in the shelter and recovery of girls who were victims of abuse. We developed our own methodology based on 3 pillars: immediate physical and emotional safety, trauma processing through therapy and expressive activities, and training for an independent future through education and professional formation. To this day, more than 1,500 girls have passed through the center. Some stayed for a few months while we helped their families restructure. Others remained for years until adulthood. Many are now educated, successful women who have overcome the trauma and built full lives. Several return as volunteers or professionals, continuing the work. In 2000, we received official recognition from the Department of Justice for the work accomplished. In 2005, I was invited to join the National Council to Combat Child Abuse. In 2010, the center inaugurated its 2nd unit in Memphis with support from the federal government. Achievements I never thought possible for a girl who, at 16, was fighting just to survive and protect her sisters. Looking back now, with the wisdom that only age brings, I see how each piece of my story brought me here, even the most painful ones. I learned that justice sometimes comes by crooked paths, that it's not always clean, clear, or peaceful. I learned that the silence of good people allows the evil of bad people to continue, to grow, to multiply. And I learned, mainly, that each girl we save is a chance to correct the past, not just mine, but that of a society that for too long has closed its eyes to the suffering of children. Would I do it all again? I don't know. Perhaps there was another way that I, at 16, couldn't see. A less drastic, less definitive way out. But in the circumstances I found myself, with the knowledge and resources I had, I did what seemed to be the only option to protect my sisters, especially Sarah. I never told the complete details to anyone, not even my husband Thomas. He always respected my silences, my secrets. Maybe he suspected the truth, maybe not. He never asked directly, and I never offered the full confession. I carried this secret for more than 60 years, but I don't feel like a criminal. I feel like a survivor who did what needed to be done in a world that offered no protection for girls like me. For the women who are listening to me and who may be going through similar situations today, know that there are more resources, more options than I had. Today we have laws protecting children and adolescents. We have specialized police stations for crimes against women. We have hotlines for anonymous reports. We have shelters for victims. We have trained professionals to offer the necessary support. If you are a victim of abuse or know someone who is, speak up, report it. Call the hotline or go to your local child protection services. If you're a mother, aunt, teacher, neighbor, be alert to the signs: sudden changes in behavior, excessive fear, sexual knowledge incompatible with age, sudden isolation. Don't do like those neighbors in Millbrook who suspected but did nothing. Your intervention can save a life, can interrupt years of suffering. The path of healing and justice isn't easy, but it's possible. I am living proof of that. From the terrified girl of Millbrook to the recognized educator of Atlanta. My journey was long and full of obstacles, but each step was worth it. Each tear, each sleepless night, each painful memory faced, everything contributed to the person I became, to the work I managed to accomplish. I am Eleanor May Johnson, but you can call me Miss Ellie, and that was the story of my life. A tale of pain, yes, but mainly of overcoming, of strength, of a woman who refused to be defeated by the evil done to her. If you want to hear more stories like mine, stories of women who transformed suffering into courage and resistance, subscribe here to the channel, because wisdom doesn't come from books. It comes from the scars that life leaves, and we old folks still have much to tell and teach. From the greatest pain of my life came my greatest mission. The scars are still here, visible in the wrinkles of my face, in the spots on my hands, in the memories that sometimes still haunt me on restless nights, but they no longer define me. They're just marks of a battle won, testimonies of a war from which I emerged not just alive, but victorious. The evil my father did died with him, buried in that cemetery in Millbrook. But the good we managed to build, my sisters, Thomas, all the volunteers and professionals at the New Dawn Center, continues to grow, multiplying in each life touched, in each child saved, in each future transformed. That's my true revenge, not his death, but the full life I built afterward. The family I formed, the girls I helped, the legacy I will leave when my time comes, a legacy of hope, of healing, of possibilities, a legacy that proves every day that our past may hurt but doesn't need to determine our future, that we can indeed break cycles, break chains, rewrite our stories. And if this is the only lesson you take from my story, it will have been worth sharing it after so many decades of silence. Because in the end, that's what it's about, transforming our individual stories of pain into a collective narrative of healing, one story at a time.